have Lynne Buchanan and Ken Dreyfack. We just went over that with him, and I did it. Dreyfack. Both be talking about their books this afternoon. The way we do this is each of the authors will talk for 10 or 15 minutes, then we'll open it up for Q&A, and then we'll go to the other one. We're going to start with Lynne first and do Ken second. During the presentations, please turn off your audio so that we don't have dogs and birds and kids and such. And then when we get to the Q&A, we'll open you back up and let you go. These little talks are not how-tos, but more inspirational. Everybody's willing and to answer the technical issues, but it's more about why we're doing the book, not how we did the book. So let's get going with Lynne.
All right. Ready for me to share the screen? Here, let's see what works.
Jump on in.
All right, let's see. We go new, share. Now we're going to go view, slideshow. There we go. All right.
Yep, like a pro.
Michael, thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about my book, Florida's Changing Waters, A Beautiful World in Peril. I worked on this book for 6 years with rivers and springs advocates, scientists, and indigenous people to learn all the issues and to collect the images. The book includes essays by environmental scientist Jason Evans and the director of the Florida Springs Institute, Dr. Robert Knight, as well as myself. The book, I wanted to showcase a lot of the beauty as well as the complexities of the issues of Florida's waterways, and also to show the impact of industrial pollution, agriculture, and expansion gone out of control with a lot of development. So I also made this book to encourage people to examine their own relationship to water and to become hopefully better stewards of this vital and very limited resource. I grew up in Florida, and at that time the waters were so pristine that it was really easy to imagine them having magical powers like Ponce de Leon's Fountain of Youth. This image was made on the Santa Fe River in the early evening, and the late afternoon light hit all these midge bugs and caused them to shimmer and cast golden reflections in the water. And it really felt to me that this is how the waterways must have looked to indigenous people when they first settled in Florida. But I soon learned that waterways were troubled everywhere. This image was taken on the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It looks really beautiful with the rainbow and skies and clear water, but actually buried under the water, there are tar mats and lots of oil from the BP oil spill. And the waterkeeper there told me that any hurricane could come and churn this up and redeposit all these tar balls on the beach. The cleanup for the BP oil spill was estimated at $145 billion. This image is the Apalachicola River, which is one of my favorite rivers in Florida, taken from Allen Bluff, the highest point, one of the highest points. And it's a very clear water compared to the rest of the waterways because it exists within the Apalachicola National Forest. Hurricane Michael, unfortunately, after this image came through and destroyed 2.8 billion acres of timber. The Apalachicola River was also the site of 90% of Florida's oysters and 10% of the nation's supply. But it's been embroiled in water wars for decades from surrounding states that need more fresh water, which has reduced the freshwater flow into the river and caused more saline, which allows the saltwater predators like starfish to enter into the bay. This, combined with hurricanes and other fish, has led to the near extinction of this industry. This image is on the Swanee State River Park, right near the convergence with the Withlacoochee River. It's a beautiful area. Its main pollutants were agricultural runoff and wastewater, but in recent years, January 2017, they ran the Sable Trail pipeline right through near here, which is very dangerous because the Falmouth Cave system, one of the largest in the world, runs right underground near here. And this is around the corner on the Withlacoochee River, where you can see the karst foundation of Florida, which exacerbates all its water problems. The pollutants can seep through all these holes in the limestone, and the salt water can rise up from below, making the problems a lot worse. This is in Mermaid Springs, and you can see there's a lot of algae within the springs now, and it's caused by runoff and nitrogen. But even in springs in Ocala National Forest or other areas where there's no development and just forest, they're finding algae in the springs, possibly because of the salt water seeping up through the bedrock and the warmer temperatures. This is Johnson Springs, and it shows the impact of flooding rains on the spring systems. When the rain pours and pours, it floods the rivers, and then that can leach into the springs, bringing pollutants, but also upsetting the whole balance of ecosystems and having an impact on native vegetation. The rising seawater coming in, this is the Chassahowitzka River, which Benjamin Dimmitt's done a lot of work on. And as the salt water intrudes, it makes its way farther and farther inland. It disrupts the balance. This right here is Baird Creek, which is very close to where the spring outlet is, and it's a pristine primeval paradise. At a very short distance away, I came across this green slime. And this is where the river and the creek converge, and there were birds feeding in it. It's a really serious problem. As salt water decomposes the cyanobacteria, it causes it to become just a worse type of bacteria and release neurotoxins and other things into the air. Of course, sea level rise is a huge problem all around Florida for St. Augustine, Miami, and other areas. This is St. Augustine, and it has been one of the cities selected by the Florida Commission for Economic Development to study about possible solutions. They have been working with the Netherlands to try to figure out what to do. The seawalls are very expensive to do the kind of thing they did in Holland, and also the water can seep up from below. Jason Evans, the scientist who wrote for my book, he has done a study, and he said, let me just check what this is. But he said, I think let me find this, a 3-foot level of sea rise would displace 1.2 million Floridians, and a 6-foot rise would displace 6 million people. So that's gonna have a lot of impact along the coastlines. One of the areas they're studying for this is the Guano-Talamado-Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve, which has lots of native seagrasses and all through these wetlands, and undisturbed coastline. I think it says, 15 feet of undeveloped coastline can displace 50% of a wave's energy. So maintaining the natural coastline around the state is really important, but unfortunately it's too late in a lot of areas. This is in Mount Lachey, and oysters and mangroves are critical to the state for cleaning the water. Mount Lachey is located right near where the Caloosahatchee River comes out into the Gulf of Mexico. And the Caloosahatchee is one of the 2 estuaries that's impacted by releases from Lake Okeechobee. So one oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day, which is quite astonishing. And around the corner from there, I saw all these birds feeding, and I watched them for a couple of hours. And they seemed really healthy and happy, even though this is a site where a lot of pollution comes through because it's being filtered by these mangroves and oysters. But there are a lot of studies in the state studying the impact of the water on birds, and they're finding it's driving them insane because of the neurotoxins. In 2016, I rode with waterkeeper Marty Baum down the C-44 Canal, which connects Lake Okeechobee with the Indian River Lagoon. And we came across this site of agricultural discharge. You can see the bird in the background feeding in the water. The close-up of the water that came out from there. I will not do this anymore because it's too dangerous, because there are really neurotoxins in this water, but you can see all the protein in there and then the cyanobacteria. We followed that cyanobacteria outbreak for 23 miles. It was really horrible, and we all felt sick for 3 days later. So it's really impacting a lot of people. It can cause Alzheimer's, MLS, and a lot of other neurological diseases. And when I spoke at North American Nature Photography Summit last year, a lot of people came up to me and said they could not even go outside in their yards because just breathing this air is so dangerous. And during one of the outbreaks, I went to Round Island and I saw this manatee struggling to breathe. And I have pictures of other manatees where they were trying to eat all that vegetation, and they can't always tell the difference between cyanobacteria and other vegetation. Around the corner from that dying, or not dying, but struggling to breathe manatee was this family of tourists swimming in the water, even though there were do not swim signs nearby. And it really is going to have an impact on the economy of the state. And people need to become more and more aware of what issues are facing water quality as more and more water bodies become unsafe. Cyanobacteria is a problem in all 50 states at this point and all around the world. Florida was once a floodplain from Orlando all the way south, and now they have developed houses and places that never should have been developed. So every time there are hurricanes and flooding rains, that's when the Army Corps releases all the water into either the Indian River Lagoon or the Caloosahatchee or the Everglades. And it's always a battle about where the water is going to go. The water is filled with toxins and has led to an alarming decrease in biodiversity. But the current plan is to bring more water here to Shark Valley and away from the Miccosukee tribe. And although the water is very toxic with heavy metals, they still need water to survive. I made this image in the heart of the Everglades when I was out with Betty Osceola, who's a member of the Panther clan of the Miccosukee tribe. And she was telling me how all her people used to live out on the tree islands, and they would just dip things into the water to drink straight from the Everglades. But they can no longer do it because the water is too tainted. So now it's affected their cultural lifestyle because they can no longer live on these islands that they once visited. And she talked a lot about the stunted alligators and also about the 7th generation philosophy and how every decision we make, we have to consider the impact for the future. This is Turkey Point Nuclear Power Plant's canal. It's a cooling canal. Turkey Point is carved right into Biscayne Bay National Park. And the water in these cooling canals gets to 100 or 105 degrees and is creating a giant saltwater plume, which is going out into Biscayne Bay and is killing the coral and other life forms there. They're planning, or they have plans in place to build 2 more power plants, and I think they are, to get the exact thing here, yeah, they're going to, projections are of sea level rise over the next 50 years, which is really unlikely. So this is a very dangerous situation that the waterkeeper there is working to address. While I was down there the last time, I went down to Key Largo and I saw this beautiful sunset, and it brought back all these memories I had of growing up in Florida 40 years ago and seeing, you know, beautiful sky and clear water, and it was just amazing. But in the morning, I got up and kayaked in Florida Bay and encountered a giant sargassum bloom, which now extends from the coast of Africa to Florida. So things look, you know, people think things are okay because it looks all right from the surface to the sky, but when you look beneath the water, it's a whole different problem. So waterways in Florida and around the world are in serious trouble. The image on the left is of Lake George off of the St. Johns River in Florida, and it shows a lot of cyanobacteria as well as some emergent vegetation. The image on the right is of melting sea ice in Antarctica, where I also went recently and exhibited some of these diptychs in Greece last summer. But as the sea ice melts, it is making all the oceans of the world warmer, and as the oceans get warmer, cyanobacteria blooms everywhere are getting worse. So it really saddens me that a lot of our waterways we can't fish near, swim on, or drink from anymore. And it really is a major problem that everyone needs to be aware of and work towards making reparations. So thank you. Now let's see, how do I stop share? All right, here we go. So this is a copy of the book. I don't think I'll ever make such a heavy book again. It's a lot to ship, but Besides the essays, there's also a large section in the back that has information on all the waterways in the book. And I did cover from the Panhandle down to the Keys on all the coasts and inland as much as I could.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Anybody have a question for Lynn?
Yes, I do. Erwin Bruder.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Lynn. You have gorgeous images. I have a two-part question.
Okay.
Who is your intended audience or hope for purchasers?
Well, actually, I have spoken to a lot of garden clubs. I work with a lot of the water keepers around the state. It's gotten into a lot of libraries. I've done a lot of public speaking, so it's reached a lot of people. I really wanted to reach not just people that thought like I did, but all people that lived near the water and understood its importance. So they printed quite a number of copies, and it's done fairly well there, which is good. I'm surprised so many people have received that. But
Okay, second part of my question is, your images are just gorgeous. And, you know, I find a conflict that you're talking about, you know, everything that is going wrong, and yet things look so beautiful.
well, half of them look beautiful, and I don't really think that Turkey Point, like Cooling Canal, looks beautiful. Or I guess as an artist, I cannot help sometimes having compositional thoughts in my mind when I take any kind of image, even bacteria or cyanobacteria. But like when people really look at water, they know that's not supposed to be in the water. So it's sort of alarming. What happened was, at first I started by doing an exhibition that was all on the beautiful waterways of Florida, and it had a lot of quotes by spiritual people and writers and philosophers, and everyone thought everything was fine. And then I started writing blogs with all the problems and showing a lot of less artistic shots of just really bad water all over, and nobody would follow me anymore. So part of the reason why I did that like that was so that people would actually look at the image and then think about it.
Thank you so very much. Lovely, 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 lovely book.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else?
I have a question. Hi, Lynn. I'm not on video. This is Daryl Ann Saunders. I'm calling in. I'm here from Brooklyn in New York.
Oh, wow.
Hi. And I lived in Florida a number of years. I just was curious. You may have mentioned this. I missed the very beginning. What's the time period during which all of this work took place? And then are you continuing with the same vigor, or are you kind of branching off into different work? Sort of a two-part question also.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I did all these images while Governor Scott was in office from about 2011 till whenever he got in office. So it was sort of am I freezing? Because it says I'm unstable. Okay. So actually, in working on this project, in the beginning, I was swimming and diving and going in on all the water. Then I was in a kayak. Then I was afraid that I would drink the water that hit my water bottle. So I went in pontoon boats, and then I went in airplanes over some bad things. So it definitely got dramatically worse while Scott was in office, which is partly why I did this book, because I was so worried about what was happening, and the current administration now and the rest of the country has rolled back so many water and regulations. I've done, since I did that book, I was gonna do surrounding states, but then I didn't. And I've done some climate change work in Bangladesh and Antarctica and other places to focus more on the global nature, and also I've done some on the coast. I've been working a lot more in the mountains where I live now, just because that's what's happened also with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah.
But it took a lot. This book took 6 years to take the images, and then 2 years to produce. So it was quite a lot of work, and I funded most of it myself.
Oh, I can imagine. It's
yeah, you can't. I mean, I thought about doing more, and I'm like, I'd have to do this time a whole Kickstarter. I can't give away my entire retirement to saving the world.
Yeah.
But I really found it was a valuable thing to do. I connected with so many water keepers and people around the state. I met amazing people, and they were very supportive. And I met people that were supportive in both parties, which is good, because my main thing has always been that water should never be a Democratic or a Republican issue. It affects all of us. It doesn't matter what party you belong to.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing more about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure, because that's one of the problems. There are these big issues, and then they get politicized, and it sort of gets completely off track. And that's why I was wondering, sometimes when someone does a book like this, sometimes the dedication can wane just because of all the complication, like you say, the money and the expense.
Yeah. Well, I had done 3 exhibits at the South Florida Museum, and this was the 3rd exhibition I did for them. It was a different one. I had a little book here, Changing Waters, the Human Impact on Florida's Aquatic Systems. And a lot of the photos came from that exhibition, and then I did a lot more after that. But that exhibition, ultimately, it ran for 6 months in the museum, but it was supposed to be a traveling show, and the Mosaic Phosphate Company, I believe, made that not happen. And, you know, so you run up against a lot of political pressure too, and it was not supposed to be political, but it doesn't matter what party and whether you own a business or you don't own a business. If the water supply is getting that seriously damaged, to the point that I left the state after the project to move to cleaner water, you know, that's a big problem.
I guess a last question, and maybe it's a little bit more mechanical, but I just wondered, because when you're doing that kind of work, you're out in water and all that sort of thing. Do you mind my asking, you know, what kind of equipment you were hefting around with you? Did you travel light? Did you have to bring a lot of, you know?
I did a lot of the book from the kayak, and so I insured my gear heavily. And some of the images I even took standing up in the kayak, so I have a lot of good balance from doing yoga. And then I also dove in the springs with a housing on it. I started with different cameras, and it just didn't work well enough until I got a really good housing for my neck on, and had to learn to operate that underground. You know, I had worked a lot with Clyde Butcher before I did this, and I thought about doing a 4x5, which I also have, but it was just too hard on a moving boat in a lot of places. Some places you can get out and stop, but there were so many images I just made from the boat, and that's the only place where you could see where some of these things that were happening, so it was important.
I don't want to monopolize, but I just wondered, so is it all digital or film, or?
It's all digital.
I figured it's a smart choice.
For that particular project, yeah.
Thank you very much. And
You're
also
welcome.
thank you, Michael, for sponsoring this kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's great series. Really honored to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I wonder if I could ask a question about your relationship to the original ancestors of the land and owners. You talked about water keepers. What is the situation for American Indians in Florida, just in terms of their the water
keepers?
Sure.
The water keepers I spoke with were not actually the water keepers of Native American people. They are part of the Water Keeper Alliance that was formed by Robert Kennedy out of Pace, but I did work with Betty Osceola of the Miccosukee, and Bobby C. Billy, and some other Native Americans around the state on the water and what was happening there. And I also went to Standing Rock after that, but that was a whole other thing for a week. So I have worked with a lot of indigenous people around the country on water, and that really impacted me a lot. They're much better caretakers of the environment that we are. One place I had to photograph after this book actually was some man's property that got seized by eminent domain for the pipeline. And they were going to run right through the graves of his ancestors, and it was just really appalling. So a local paper and I tried to help him out, and in the end they moved it like, I don't know, 100 feet away, but you know, they went way around the dirt bike area. But it's a very difficult situation in Florida for them. I know they want to go through Big Cypress, and that's where Betty Osceola and the Miccosukee are. And you know, they keep taking the water away from them, which is bad. Then they try to go drill in there, which is ridiculous, because the whole Karst Foundation and the whole geology of Florida was so not going to work for getting oil. It goes through all the holes, and then fracking is such a bad idea with things leaking in there. They eventually stopped that, but they're very active. Actually, they do a lot of walks and a lot of, you know, around the whole lake and things like that to get people involved. So they're great.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else for Lynn?
I'd like to ask something.
Okay,
Lynn, it's a beautiful book. I really enjoyed what you had to say too about it. I have a question about human interaction. You had the one photograph there of people swimming. Are there any other photos in the book that show, you know, interaction with water and waterways?
I did take, and there's another photograph in the book of Serge Latour, who was the head of the Florida Green Guide Association, and he's kayaking through Tate's Hill, where I went with him. A lot of it I just did myself on the waterways, so I didn't, you know, take a lot of people like that. I had other photos that didn't make it into the book with the water keepers and other people like that, but they really wanted to focus when George and David did it, just on the waterways themselves. So.
Okay.
That photo, there was somebody swimming in the springs actually, and then Serge Latour kayaking in Tate's Hill.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you much.
You're welcome.
okay. We'll pass the torch over to Ken, who is going to do a presentation from his car today. He's having internet issues, so this will be a first. Ken is shown in a number of shows at the Southeast Center. In fact, he'll be in next month's Light exhibition. Just gorgeous black and white urban scenes usually. And Silent Stage is the book that Ken has done with Daylight Publishing, just coming out. And we'll let Ken talk for a few minutes, and then we'll throw questions at him. Take it, Ken.
Thank you, Michael. So I hope you can see and hear me. I am sitting in the front seat of a Mini Cooper because our home internet went out about an hour and a half ago. So if you can't see or hear, let me know, because I can't tell. This is the book. It's called Silent Stages. It's my first book. It's a project that I've been working on for about 5 years, I guess. And it didn't really start off as a project. It just started off as me taking pictures. And it actually evolved as I worked on it. I'm not an MFA. I had another career, mostly as a journalist and a writer, and always did some photography on the side. And I think what I'm going to do is try to share my screen and go through these photos while I'm talking. Desktop. Yes. Okay. And over the course of working on it, I'd always been attracted to black and white photography. And I discovered I was particularly attracted to night photography. And what although these particular ones are daytimes, what I found, and this sounds like a joke, but actually I really mean it, I see better in the dark. And what I mean by that is I can see the light. When it's at nighttime, you can see light because otherwise everything is dark. So I was just I've always been drawn to the light, and I found I could see the light better in the dark. So, and I've always loved black and white. I can't explain it, I just do. So for a number of years, I traveled around the world because I do love to travel, and I've traveled quite a lot. I lived half my life abroad in France. I lived in France for 30 years, became a French citizen, and I'm almost as French as I am American, although you probably can't hear that. So I'm accustomed to traveling in international places. And I brought my project to Photo Lucida in Portland, Oregon last year. And with the idea of shopping it around to editors and see if somebody who would be interested in putting it into a book. And a few publishers were interested, and they asked me whether I had thought about who would write text for the book. And I honestly hadn't at all, which struck me as odd, because I, for 40 years, had been a journalist and a writer. And I never thought about who would write text for the book. So that put me into a crisis mode. And while I was there in Portland, actually in the hotel room, I had a few sleepless nights. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm going to write the text for the book. Of course, I'm a writer. And that greatly modified the project. Again, in my hotel room in Portland at this Photo Lucida event, I started jotting down texts. And what I wrote were short autobiographical paragraphs related to the photos, but not captions for the photos. They were about things in my childhood, and what I was trying to explain, and ended up explaining to myself, was that these photos are actually biographical. They're a kind of a memoir. It's not, for example, that this gas station is part of my personal history. It's not. But I realized why was I interested in these nighttime scenes? Why were there all these single figures, mostly single figures, wandering, a lot of them shot from the back, kind of anonymous and maybe fleeing a little bit. And that changed the project. I removed all of the travel photos, the photos from London and Laos and Myanmar and India and Arizona and all places that I had visited, but really I had no personal connection to. And I only kept photos from New York and Paris, which are I don't know why these are zooming this way. Let me see if I can fix this. Yeah, there it is. Because it turns out that, to my great surprise, that this work is much more personal than I ever suspected. So there's more of every place is a place that I've lived or near a place that I've lived, and the exotic places are gone. I think I could stop there, and I'd be happy for you to ask questions, which I'll try to answer for you. I don't want to discourse much more. And I think, I don't know, should I continue going through the photos like this, or would you prefer would you rather see me? Michael, what do you think?
Well, you can let the photos go and people can jump in.
Great.
Anybody have a question for Ken?
Yes, Michael, I do have a question.
Okay.
Thank you. Your photos are really lovely. And when you said that it turned into more of an autobiographical project than you had anticipated, Ken, was that because you eliminated the other photos, or were they also autobiographical? You just decided to focus on these two places. Was there, in other words, was there a non-autobiographical dimension of what you described to be the more exotic locations?
No, I think I've come to realize that everything I do is sort of autobiographical. Every photo is really about me, regardless of whether it's a Laotian peasant woman or this woman looking into the restaurant or whoever it is. They're all about me, for better or for worse. But it seemed that using exotic locales didn't quite fit as well as using the places that I actually live. This is, for example, this is in Kingston, New York, which is where I live. So it just seemed that it would be more personal, but they're all about, you know, the same thing, really, regardless of where they're shot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ken, this is.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, now many of these shots, do you purposefully go out on a night and say, I'm going to look for photos? Do you just carry your camera all the time? How do you work? And what camera do you use?
I go out shooting. I choose the times. I don't have a camera with me all the time. And I actually, I used to have a camera with me all the time for about, I don't know, for periods of 6 months or a year. I do walk around with a camera almost all the time. And I find that I never take the lens cap off when I'm just wandering around. That I really need to be dedicated to going out. And many times I go out and I come back totally frustrated because I didn't see anything that, you know, that really seemed interesting to me. But I do purposefully go out wandering through the streets at, you know, at 10 or 11 or midnight to shoot photos. Is that what you meant?
Yes, yes. They're, I really like them. They're very nice, very strong.
Thank you.
Can you have photos from New York and Paris? You said that you put in this book. Can you talk a bit about the sequencing? Do you have first all the New York and then the Paris, or is it a mix? And what was your thinking process in the sequencing?
Well, that was the hardest part, I think, of putting the book together, the sequencing. They're not together. In other words, there's not a Paris section and a US section or a New York section. They are, and I should tell you that the sequence that I'm showing you here is not the sequence of the book. I had to throw this together very quickly in the last hour in order to get it onto my hard disk to be able to show it to you from the car. So they're out of sequence. But what I tried to do in sequencing them, you know, I had an artistic director from Daylight, the publisher, who worked with me on this, and she told me, and I read in various advice about how to put together a photo book, and documents and suggestions and books, it always says, well, it should tell a story, and there should be a narrative. And I had great difficulty with that concept of having I can see the notion of a narrative in where you're dealing with a kind of a tightly defined subject about, for example, in Lynne's book, you could see I can see a narrative. There is a story that she's telling. I never found that story, I really have a hard time getting my head around that. So what I did is I looked for images where I thought the images spoke to one another when they were adjacent to one another. So there are a couple of gas station auto garage images. Some of them are in Paris and some of them are in New York. And I put some of those together because I thought they spoke to one another. And finally came up with working with the designer, came up with a sequence that made sense to both of us, but don't ask me too much to explain the sense because I'm not really good at that.
No. It's more feeling than science. I fully understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else for Ken?
Yes, I'd like to know, since so many of these are done at night, I'm assuming there's long exposure involved, and yet I don't see any motion issues. Pretty interesting.
Actually, there aren't long exposures. What there are high ISOs. Everything is handheld. I don't walk around with a tripod. But, I've got this camera, which just is so sensitive that, and has a lot of stabilization in it. So I can hold it for a 40th of a second and get a clear shot. And that's how I do them. By the way, maybe this might be of interest to you. They were all at night for about 2 or 3 years. I never took my camera out into the daylight until I saw an exhibit of work by Harry Callahan. Harry Callahan got some kind of a sabbatical year in the south of France, and he went out at noon in the brightest light, which in the south of France in the summertime is really bright, and he shot the bright light and the dark shadows cast by the narrow streets in these old buildings. And looking at that, I realized that, at least I thought, wait, I'm doing the same thing he is, just the other way around. And that convinced me that I could go out in the daytime with my camera, which was a huge discovery, that I could have my contrasty black and whites, and it didn't have to be at night.
Wow.
Okay. Ellen threw out a question here. I'm not sure whether it's for Ken or for Lynne, about process of taking project from photos to a book. That's could be a rather involved answer. If either of you would want to approach a quick response to that.
Well, I never intended to do a book originally. I love to look at prints, larger prints, hanging on a wall in a gallery or museum. That's my favorite way of looking at photographs. But it seems like it's increasingly difficult to have more than one of, at least for me, to get more than one of my photographs hanging on a wall somewhere. And that's fine. So the book seemed like a choice, but honestly, it still is my second choice.
For me, I did the exhibition at the South Florida Museum that had 53 photos, and I made this to sell. I just made it myself after taking one of Elizabeth Avenon's bookmaking courses to sell at the exhibition. But then when it became sort of censored from being a traveling show, I was a little upset. And then I met Joanna Hurley at Art Basel, and she convinced me to do the book, to do the larger book. And so I had it published out of state because there was a real, at that time in Florida, they didn't want that information getting out of the state, and I thought it was important. So I had to go out of state to have someone help me make the book and then publish it. So my son said they shut up the wrong person.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for either Lynn or Ken?
Yes, I'm Lori. Sorry,
Hi, Lori.
my video is not working. Ken, what kind of camera did you use for your project, for your photos?
So it's a Sony full frame Alpha 7. I started off with the Model 2, I think. It's an Alpha 7 2R. And about just a few months ago, I replaced it with the newer model, the Alpha, I'm not sure I'm getting this right, and the Alpha 7 4R. I might not have those letters and numbers in the right order, but it's a full frame Sony digital, what do you call it? It's not a DLSR. It's a
Mirrorless.
It's a non-reflex. It's right, mirrorless camera. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a question.
Yes.
If that's okay. I just wondered, I wrote it in the chat, but I realize you may not be looking at that. So this is Daryl.
Yep.
How is your book publishing experience with Daylight, especially meaning Daylight, the company? Because is there anything you do differently? One of the things I recognize is that it can be difficult to print dark images, so that might be its own challenge. But I just wondered, how was your experience with Daylight and what you would do differently if you had the chance to do so?
Well, it was as I expected it to be. I did some research and I talked to people who had published with Daylight previously to find out what they were like, and so I knew that I knew what they would supply and provide, and I knew what they wouldn't provide.
Yeah.
And it's turned out pretty much that way, except there's been this issue of the virus, which has really made it difficult.
When did your book come out?
I mean, all the book signings and all that, it's all been canceled.
Yeah.
Sure. When did your book come out? When was it published? Sorry.
It was officially published June 1st.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's hard.
My condolences.
Yes, but it makes me especially grateful for this opportunity to be able to present it, to show it to you, because it's very few people have seen it, you know.
Sure.
Beautiful. I'm gonna have to order it. It's really gorgeous.
Thank you.
Okay.
And by the way, I get nothing from the sale of the book. Under the terms of the contract with the publisher, everything goes to the publisher. I get 0 cents.
Well, yeah, and I think that may be the case with most these days, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that true that most books don't provide any income stream?
Most books require you to participate in the finance. And it, not only do they not provide income stream,
Yeah.
they want you to finance
Yeah,
it.
no, I understand that, but I think I'm surprised that you are not, you don't have access to any profit, so to speak.
Not for the original print run. If there is a second print run, the original print run is like 1,000. And in the extremely rare case that they sell out and want to do another print run, then you can rediscuss and renegotiate the terms.
What was
Go ahead, Lynn. I'm sorry.
What was the publisher's reaction to the text that you wrote, to the paragraphs? Did you have to argue for it? Did they like it right off the bat, since it wasn't a literal caption, so to speak?
Well, the publisher didn't have a reaction to it. Honestly, the publisher didn't care. The publisher was not a kind of a aesthetic partner in the creation of the book. The graphic designer was for the graphic design, but for the whole concept of the book and for which images should be in or shouldn't be in, or should I have an introduction, or because there is an introduction written by somebody else actually, by David Ross. And I eventually omitted all those paragraphs. At the last minute, I took them all out. I thought that the images should speak for themselves and that my personal history really didn't need to be literally present in there, that it was visually present, and that was enough.
And did you at least come away with some quantity of the books?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're piled up in my basement. Yep.
Now, I guess, let me sort of rephrase that. Did you have to purchase them, or was that sort of, you got a certain number of them as a part of the arrangement?
I got a certain number. I got 200 copies of the book as part of the arrangement.
Okay.
But I contributed very significantly to the cost of printing and publishing the book.
Yeah, that's what happened with me. I funded the book. I should have done a Kickstarter, but I had to move from a hurricane and my father died at the same time. So I just ended up funding it. But I got 100 free copies, and then I purchased another 100 copies. And I've sold all of those, but I have a few left, but not too many. But I get 50% of all the book sales, but given in regular bookstores, that's good. But when you go on Amazon, he's trying to undercut the entire world, which, they insisted on putting it on. It's very difficult. But I never did it to make money. It was just, I wanted to do it because I really cared about the environment and what was happening there. And it was like, now I don't have to say that I just complained without doing anything. I did one thing. And I feel like that's good.
So this is for both Ken and Lynne then. Hearing this, did you consider going to a print-on-demand service like Blurb or something else where?
I didn't want to, because I wanted to make a really top-notch coffee table, good, substantial, book that would be well respected and that people would look at. And I got to get David Skulkin, who was the co-founder of Radius Books, to design it. So I worked with George and myself, the publisher, worked on what was going to go in it. And then David and I worked on the whole design, and he's really a genius. He did a really beautiful job. So, given that I did it to raise awareness and I wanted it to get in as many places as possible, to produce highest quality products. But I have made books myself on that, but it's just, I'm happy I went the way I did, even though it was hugely expensive.
So Ken, where could someone purchase one of your books?
Well, you can purchase it from Amazon, or you can purchase it directly from Daylight. Either go to Daylight, I think it's daylight.com or Daylight Books. If you Google Daylight Books, it'll show up. Or if you look for it on Amazon.com, it'll show up.
Okay. And what's the title again? I didn't write
Silent Stages.
Silent Stages.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
It's daylightbooks.org.
Daylightbooks.org. Okay.
How did you come up with that title?
Well, I think it's a movie thing. You know, I'm kind of an old romantic slob, and I love those old movies, the old black and white movies, and they're you know, they're in black and white and they're silent. Some of them, they're not, usually they're talking. I don't watch a lot of silent movies, but it reminded me of the sets. Looking at the photographs, it reminded me of the sets. And later, I understood the title in a different way. After those sleepless nights in Portland, that these are stages of my life, actually, which are silent because they've been buried. They've been buried for years and years, decades. You know, I'm old. But it's still there. That those sidewalks, and there are, I don't know if you noticed, a lot of sidewalks. I was a kid in the Bronx, you know, and those sidewalks were my playground when I was 3 and 4 and 5 years old. So in that sense, I thought of it as these are silent stages of my life, in addition to being sound stages for movies.
When I guess saw silent, I thought of the isolation in the images, that's what you were speaking to, the silence that comes from aloneness and isolation. And that's what I thought the book was about.
Yeah, you're right. And I don't like to talk about
that. Sorry.
You're right.
I was going to ask a similar question. I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, but what's the relationship between the images and identity? You sort of touched on that. And at the same time, is there a sense of identity has to do with place and belonging? These are heavy on place. Is there a sense in the photos of belonging or not belonging in the world that you were trying to convey through the photos?
You know, I'm a person who's moved back and forth between 2 countries 5 times and spent half of my life in another country and kind of adapting to that. So the sense of foreignness, I feel like I'm a foreigner no matter where I go. That because of all that time out of the country and missing all this American stuff, and picking up all this other stuff from another culture, I may sound American, but there's something about me that's less American than people who never lived somewhere else for 30 years. So in that sense, there's a sense of alienation, I think. And also when you keep moving long distances, especially between countries, you lose contact with people. You have friends, and if you haven't seen a friend in 10 or 20 years, a lot of them, most of them fall by the wayside. And the older you get, the more isolated you get. So is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. This idea of, it also ties in, I think, a little bit with the idea of home and maybe even the word homeland. You know, it's always sort of been accepted belief that, you know, every person has one homeland. This is my homeland, or this is my my country, where I live. But I think, that concept probably has changed and is in process, and in process of change. Maybe it's not necessary just to have one homeland. Maybe, we can live, between countries, between 2 or 3 countries, and feel that all these places are our homes. And that has to do, once again, going back to the beginning, to the idea of identity. Does that affect your look at yourself through your photos in terms of identity? I don't mean to get too complicated,
Yeah,
but
no, there are trade-offs. I think there are trade-offs that at least personally, I feel like I have enriched myself enormously by really having 2 cultures, 2 languages, 2 ways of living and 2 ways of looking at the world. But the trade-off is that you don't go home. One of the little paragraphs I wrote was when I moved from Paris back to the US. I moved to Brooklyn, and this was in 2006. And I was still going back and forth quite often for my work. I was a freelance writer, and I have family there. And I never knew when I was going home and when I was leaving home, regardless of which way I was going.
uh-huh.
Lynn, I was going to ask, are you planning another book? And if you are, how would it be different than what you're doing now? Did anybody hear that?
Sorry, I heard you. Sorry, I had muted it in case my dog barked at the bears again. I had considered it, but I sort of am taking a little break right now. I'm working on like platinum, palladium, and some other things like that. But if I do another book, it'll be on farming. Because when I did a lot of the work on water, I learned a lot about the whole issue of farming and water and the environment. And so last year I got accepted to the Society of Environmental Journalists, and I went and met with them, and I met a lot of contacts and people that would write on that. So when I get up the energy to do it again. But I will do a Kickstarter this time because I'm not funding too. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Lynne. Can you talk a little bit about how long, and I have to apologize, I came in late, so I didn't hear your talk, which I'm very sorry for. Can you talk a little bit about how long you worked on this project? I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and I spent a couple of years working on a project about the environmental impacts on Lake Washington. And I'm curious about
I spent
how long this effort went on.
The photographs are all from a 6-year period. Primarily in this book, they were from the last 3 years, but there were some earlier. I had done a first museum exhibition on beautiful waterways of Florida or something with healing images and philosophical quotes. But while working on that, I saw a lot of pollution and other problems. So I asked the curator of the museum if I could do another exhibition on human impacts on aquatic systems. And he said yes, and then we did it, but it was a little bit challenging because the phosphate company built a wing on the museum, and they attempted to rewrite my artist statement, which I said no, and I held firm on that, but they didn't show some things. So it took 6 years to do the photographs, and then it was like 2 years of working on the book, or 1.5 years or something. They did it pretty quickly once, because I had really 1 million images. I just kept shooting them. And I had published them for Waterkeeper Alliance and things in their magazine on the issues. So I had a huge stack. I printed them all out and went to see George Thompson, once he accepted the book, and we just laid everything out. And then I went to New Mexico and worked with David Skulkin and did the same thing again.
So,
great designer.
So you just previously, I think you mentioned you're doing platinum, palladium. So you do fine art work also?
Yeah, that's what I switched to. I mean, that was not, like, for this issue, because it was really, to me, a very big environmental problem. And I felt like it was really important to do it more with straight, photography, that because I really care about fine art, those concepts like went into there a little bit, but I tried to make it so that it looked like it was actually where it was, so people would believe that that's what was actually happening to the water and the way it still was or the way it needed to be saved. But last year I worked with Jill Enfield for 8 weeks at Penland, learning alternative process from her. So I've been working on platinum, palladium, and caustic and some other things because it's just nice to touch materials after working that way so digitally for so long in the book.
Okay,
So it's fun for me.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. I guess that's going to wrap us up today if nobody else has anything.
Wow.
Next month, which will be August 15th, we have Fran Froman and The Rest Between Two Notes, and Rick McCluskey's Van Nuys Boulevard, 1972.
Excellent.
Two very different projects, but both of them are excellent books, and we look forward to that. So watch your email in a few weeks, and we'll do it again.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
That's really great.
Thank you both.
Thank you all for listening and for
I
tuning in. I appreciate it very
I
much.
just wanted to mention to everyone that if you want to save the chat, because sometimes people don't know this, if you want to save the chat, just go to the lower right where the 3 dots are and you click on it and save chat, and it'll pop up after the Zoom is over and you can see people's comments. And
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, because I'm trying to listen and watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not read the chat. I can't do that and look and.
No.
Great.
Yeah, but
It's multitask.
if you go down to the bottom, Ken, if you're able to, there's the 3 little dots.
Yes, I did that, and I've saved it.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And this is being recorded, and we'll post this on the website by tomorrow morning.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you
Thanks,
so
Michael.
much. Yeah, it was great. Looking forward to next month.
Yes, it's going to be good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Michael.
everyone.
Thanks, Ken.
You. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Okay, we lost Lynn. Hang on, Ken. Hang on, Bill.
Yeah.